Hello, and welcome to today's program. Thank you for joining us. I'm C. Virginia Fields, former Manhattan Borough President and current President and CEO of the National Black Leadership Commission on AIDS, NBLCA. The mission of NBLCA is to educate, mobilize, and empower Black leaders to meet the challenge of fighting HIV/AIDS and other health disparities in their local communities. Founded in 1987, NBLCA is the oldest and largest nonprofit organization of its kind in the United States, fighting HIV/AIDS within the African American community. And as we celebrate our 30th anniversary this year, we are taking a look back at the organization's long and rich history. NBLCA has long advocated for the importance of working with a broad spectrum of community leaders, including clergy, public officials, medical practitioners, and those in social policy as well as media. And today we see the urgency and inclusivity of our work mirrored throughout organizations across this country. And here with me today to discuss the rich history of the organization is Harriet R. Michel. Now, Harriet is one of the founders of NBLCA, as well as a noted administrator and public policy expert on minority issues. She has worked for over 50 years in the public sector, developing and managing programs that address major social concerns. Harriet served as the president of the National Minority Supplier Development Council for 22 years and retired in 2010. She's taught at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, served as president and CEO of the New York Urban League, and worked for the United States Department of Labor's Community Youth Employment Program. And she now heads her own business advisory firm, providing services to small businesses and corporations. So welcome, Harriet, and thank you so much for joining me today. It was just funny almost as I read through your bio and saying that you're retired. I see you in so many places, and I see your name on so many projects. I said retirement does not fit, or you are redefining the word retirement. But I'm really happy to have you here today. And now as we're celebrating our 30th years, Harriet, first of all, the fact that this organization is now 30 years old. And I know that you and Deborah Frazier Howes working together at the Urban League really kicked it off. So why don't you tell us a little about how we got here?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm always delighted to weigh in on subjects that are near and dear to my heart. It hardly seems like 30 years when we got together and decided we needed to do something. The story is interesting. Deborah, I was the president of the New York Urban League, the first woman to be president, and Deborah was working for us running a teenage pregnancy program. And we were providing services for very young girls, very young teens who found themselves pregnant. We thought what we needed to do was run a program also for the fathers of these babies. And when we did outreach and talked to the girls about who their partners were, we found out that their partners were not teenage boys. They were older men who were introducing young girls to crack, taking them into crack dens, having them smoke crack, and as you may probably know, that women are very susceptible to crack. They can
now
very
this is in the early 80s?
This is in the early 80s, okay. Yes. We had a grant to run to provide services for young teenage mothers. I'll never forget one day when we were having a workshop in the office, there was a young woman who came in, very pregnant, with about a 6 or 7 year old. They were sitting in the lobby waiting for the program to start. The 7-year-old had her thumb in her mouth going like this, but her mother, who was no more than 18, had her hand finger in her mouth doing that as well. And it just broke my heart because it struck me at how young and vulnerable. So in listening to these girl stories, we realized that many of them were being exploited by older men and being taken in, as I said, to these crack dens and smoking crack. And we decided that we needed the typical services were not appropriate, that AIDS had begun to be discussed but barely in our community, because initially we didn't want anything to do with it. We thought it was a white gay disease.
Right.
And when the girls started contacting AIDS, we decided we needed to take a strong look and gather both civic leaders and politicians to discuss what could be done. So we pulled together I think it was a 2-day seminar somewhere in Long Island, where many of the people that you will be honoring at your gala on October 31st came to discuss what we could do as a black community, because we realized there was very little being done for us. Once again, the focus and the dollars were on the white gay community. And we figured if we were going to get anything done for us, it had to be done by us. And so Deborah actually left the New York Urban League and this teen pregnancy program and went out on her own and started the first AIDS program. Now, in the beginning, there was very little funding. The black church initially didn't want very much to do with, because they were against homosexuality, and they had a lot of problems. And so it was hard initially to bring the religious community in and be supportive. But our community was being ravaged. It was not just young women, it was young men, but it was certainly young women. And I think people forget that and focus really on men. But it was really a lot of young women that had AIDS, and many of them, as I said, were carrying babies. So we pulled together this group of people in Long Island, from which we agreed to start an organization of which the Urban League would be a part, but would not be the sole sponsor. And we recruited people like Darwin Davis from Equitable Life Assurance Society, who since passed away. But we recruited David Dinkins. But the big get at that time was convincing Reverend Calvin Butts to come in and be supportive and identify with this issue. Because as I said, in too many churches, even the discussion of homosexuality was verboten. So having Reverend Butts come in and decide that he would be supportive was a big step forward, and being able to bring together the rest of the community, the rest of the clergy community, and the civic community, and deciding that we needed a specific organization that looked at AIDS in the black community, especially in Harlem.
Oh, this is exciting. I am listening to you and thinking about, what that must have been like, not having been involved with the beginning of the organization and seeing where things are. And in some ways, the more things change, the more they remain the same. In that, unfortunately, here we are 35 years since the Center for Disease Control released the first press statement about what this is. It was initially talked about GRID, a gay men's disease, and that's how most people just associate it, without much attention, as you said, being given to the black community, despite the fact that babies were being left in the hospital, border babies as they were called. But, we clearly have made a lot of progress. There's no question about it. But we're still very much constrained by stigma, especially in the black community. Gay men and persons who are living with AIDS not wanting to be identified for fear of being ostracized. We're still, unfortunately, living with that. We're still struggling with getting the monies and the resources in the black community to promote testing and getting people linked to care and keeping them to care so that their viral load is suppressed and they cannot transmit the disease. So a lot of, and we can, speak about that in a few minutes, about what a lot of the accomplishments, there's no question. But with women especially, I recall the fact of women showed signs very early on, but they were either considered women on the street and therefore unworthy of care.
Right.
And they were not given treatment. And that had to be a big fight. And now today we see heterosexual black women as having the highest incidence, new rates. And I would have to think that if more attention had been given back then, we might have seen a turnaround.
I don't know why there isn't more discussion. I don't know why there wasn't more discussion then about the highly addictive nature of crack and to women, because I live on 147th Street in Harlem, between Broadway and Riverside, which is a pathway to the park, to Riverside Park. Mm-hmm. And I can remember in the 70s, men coming down the street, being trailed by these young girls, taking them into park to smoke crack. Mm. And you wouldn't, you know, the effects, you're absolutely right, the effects of both crack and then AIDS presents itself much earlier with women for whatever reason, but physical reason. But those girls were afraid. They had no one to turn to. They couldn't talk to their parents. The community would immediately ostracize them. Do you remember when Mother Hale started her home for the crack babies?
Yes.
I mean, it had reached proportions that we were walking away from our own children.
Yeah, Harlem Hospital.
Right, exactly.
All of the border babies.
All
there
those
in
border
Harlem
babies,
Hospital.
right. Well, that was that community of black women that, excuse me, had no services, had no places, many of them poor, without families or fractured families, with no place to leave their children. And so we then had a whole cohort of young black children who were coming up, who were born addicted to crack, we were terrified that they had inherited AIDS through birth. It was, you know, trying to get the community to understand the depth of what was happening to us, to our children. Now, were they middle class black kids? No, but they were our kids nonetheless.
Yes, right.
They were black kids. Trying to get the churches to understand and to buy in, that to show compassion and provide services for these kids was an uphill battle in those days. I mean, as you say, you're still fighting, in many instances, the same thing. And I know that over the years that white groups of gay men have been able to access funding so much easier than the African American community. You know, we've first of all, we've got to convince people that there's still an AIDS epidemic among us, and secondly, that people need services.
And I would say, again, the white gay community gave tremendous leadership to opening this up, like groups like ACT UP and others who really helped to define the research that was needed and the monies coming into the communities. And at the same time, African American communities were not given the attention. And as a result, we still see African American communities disproportionately impacted. Of course, as many of our viewing audience know, because we talk about it from time to time in terms of black gay men, black men who have sex with men, same gender loving persons, young gay black men between the ages of 13 to 24. 35 years later, you would think that that age group would be better protected or certainly have information so that we don't see the numbers. But there's a growing disparity in terms of that group. But having said that, we have seen progress. We've seen progress in terms of antiretroviral treatment. The treatments are much more available, accessible, and they work. So it's important for people to get tested. And we were not stressing testing so much during the time when NBLCA even got started. Getting tested, and for those who are positive, getting into care, because a person can live a better quality of life with AIDS if they are in care. But staying in care, and still in our community, what we're seeing is one might go into care, but they don't stay in care sufficiently long enough so that their viral load is suppressed and they cannot transmit the disease. So getting tested, get into care, stay in care. And then, of course, PrEP, pre-exposure prophylactin, which is a medication that a person can take once a day, and along adhering to other guidelines, safe sex, and discipline, they can prevent themselves from becoming positive if they are negative. So when you take all of this together and look at it, the black community is still disproportionately impacted.
Well, but I think part of it is, you know, years ago, there were so many high-profile people who had the disease, who died from the disease, and because that kind of level of conversation is not going on now, whether black or white, I think too many people think it's gone away, or they hear, I have terrible allergies, I apologize, or they hear,
that time of year.
right, or they hear about the medications, or they know people who are living with AIDS, so they don't feel as the immediate need to get themselves to treatment, to keep themselves in treatment. And I just would like to say that where we are in the United States right now in 2017, with Donald Trump being the president, we got to make sure that everything possible that can be done for our community is done, because we're not going to be able to depend on the federal government for much of anything for the next, I think, several years, you know.
And we are seeing proposed budget cuts, especially in these areas. And you're absolutely right. And so that's why our work, building on the foundation that you all started back in 1987, making certain that the faith-based organizations are involved. That continues to be a part of the base on which we work today.
Right.
And we've grown. We're in about 11 or 12 cities now with affiliates, but we work through partnerships with over 150 other organizations. And I'm pleased to say that recently at the United States Conference on AIDS in Washington, D.C., we facilitated a workshop on race, R-A-S-E.
Wonderful.
And the discussion, we had about 92 participants in the workshop, that particular session. And they were from across the country, predominantly African Americans, and maybe one or two white persons there. But it was our community. And the compassion, the concern, the feelings that we heard about this, with blacks still being disproportionately impacted, really boiled down to looking at race. Why is that? And there's so many other factors we looked at that impact HIV. Obviously, poverty, if a person is not working, whether they go into a crack house or whether they take some other forms of drug, that's still real today. So there are many issues that we still have to address, as you said, because if we don't do it, it's not going to happen. Just as it wasn't happening when you started this organization, the same is true today.
Well, I would hope that a lot of the organizations in our community would include and pay attention to AIDS. We get off, you know, we have such a community of need. We need everything. No, really. You know, jobs, housing, education, better educational opportunities. I mean, ours is a community in need. I was recently reading the average household worth of the African American family is, I mean, going down.
Yes,
is going down.
It's going down.
And so when you try to, you know, organizations, I understand, are overwhelmed because they're just multiple requests. There are multiple requests for assistance, and the need is great, but such a profound health issue, we cannot afford. So continuing with the urban leagues of the world, and some of the, you know, the sororities and fraternities, which are so popular right now. One of the things that Donald Trump has done has driven black people back to black organizations. Remember, I said that on here, okay? So all of these organizations are really experiencing greater participation, enthusiastic participation. I just think that we need to understand what our health issues are, and that remains that HIV/AIDS remains a fundamental health issue for our community, and we cannot take our eye off the prize. So there are lots of organizations out there that need to include at least education, if nothing else, as part of the their program and offerings.
And that, again, is a big part of this work, building on that foundation that education and prevention is so important. And with education, as you very well know, having to repeat the same message over and over again, you might say, well, I taught this 2 years ago, met with the same group, and I feel like I'm just starting. It is the hardest thing, and that's an area where we're finding that money is continuing to drive, but it can't stop us. I agree with you. Our civic organizations, because all of them have health committees, our sororities, our civic groups, our links, our 100 Black Women, 100 Black Men, we all have health committees, and by and large have national meetings and conferences, so that when we do that, to be able to have workshops on HIV/AIDS, because it is important to keep it in the forefront. A lot of people believe, as you said, it's no longer a problem, but it is a problem. We're seeing the re-emergence of bathhouses in some of our areas. We're seeing, as men are released from prison, as they call it, brother's been down a long time, so they're bringing girls to just have sex over the weekend, and it was sort of reminded me of that when you were talking about the young girls who were having the sex with the older men going into the crack house. So it's almost as if we're seeing a repeat of a lot of this, and it's going to be incumbent upon those of us who do know, certainly to stay involved, and that's why I'm so excited about you.
Well, we can't keep repeating pathology, that's for sure. You know, we've got to find ways to work our way out of it. And there was for a period of time intense focus, discussion at least in our community about AIDS. But again, it was because of the high visibility of so many public figures.
Yes.
The Magic Johnsons and that sort of thing.
Ashe.
But yes, Arthur Ashe. We can't pretend that it's not a problem anymore. And I just want to say that while I was the head of the Urban League and we agreed to do this program, it was the energy and the passion of Deborah Fraser House who really got out there. I mean, she buttonholed and bantered and batted people around to get them to commit to supporting us, coming to meetings. Without her level of energy, I don't know that we would have really gotten this thing off the ground. So I say to her, thank you, Deborah, and I know that you will thank her in the future, and she's been thanked in the past, but I cannot overstate what her energy and her passion, how important they were to getting this thing up off the ground.
And she's still exerting a lot of
Absolutely.
energy and passion today, and that really helps, and that has certainly helped to keep this organization alive because of that passion. She recently retired, of course, from Orshore Pharmaceuticals, but she's still very much involved. Matter of fact, she's a member of the board of NBLCA at this time and gives energy to that. So we have a great deal of thanks to Deborah, to you. And this year, as we are celebrating, we are pleased to be able to honor several of the founders, people who were in there very early. Yourself, the Honorable David Dinkins, the Honorable Reverend Dr. Calvin O. Butts III, you mentioned him, Hazel Dukes, and Dr. Marcella Maxwell. And I mentioned them because while many did, of course, start, but the fact that you all remained connected on some level with it, I think speaks volumes, and it cannot be ignored. So we will be honoring you, as well as the Michael Jackson family for the work that he did and devoted time to. And another notable person, the Dr. Gail, she has been doing phenomenal work, and she now has recently been appointed as Helene Gale as the new CEO of the Chicago Community Trust, first African American and woman to be in that post. So people who have really been in the trenches and made a difference in 30 years, we thought it was so important to give you that recognition. And I'm just so delighted that you were able to come by today and just talk about this. And we've talked about a range of issues, and I like these kind of discussions because you don't have to be wedded to what's on the next line or what's the next question. And you have just made it all so worthwhile, Harriet. So I really, really want to thank you, and I just, commend you for what you've done and making it possible for the work for me to continue to do so.
Well, you're doing a bang-up job, and my hat is off to you, because I know it sometimes gets lonely, but you got to keep your nose to the grindstone and your shoulder to the wheel.
Now that is so very, very true. So I want to thank you so very much. And to all of our viewers, to learn more about NBLCA and our 30th anniversary gala, please go to our website at nblca.org and look for NBLCA on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. The Manhattan Neighborhood Network brings these programs to you to better inform you, the viewer, about the important topics that impact your health and well-being. So please let your family, friends, and neighbors know about this programming. I am C. Virginia Fields, and I thank you for joining us and hope you'll tune in next time for NBLCA's Health Action TV right here on Manhattan Neighborhood Network.